Well, Jesus said we're to be salt and light in the world, and certainly as we glorify God and reflect the Lord Jesus, there will be an effect. And it's twofold, really. 1 Peter's fascinating on this, because Christians that Peter was writing to were a minority in the world. And he assumes, he calls us to live good lives among the pagans. That's the great appeal. And he assumes when that happens, two things will happen. On the one hand, there'll be abuse, because people don't like those who are different. Sometimes there's an exposure of darkness and evil, which holiness reveals, that doesn't go down very well, will be distinct and different. But on the other hand, some will think, wow, there's something about that, and live such good lives among the pagans that though they speak against you, they will glorify God on the day He visits us. And so those two things should happen. I would love to think that in time, no one could say what Christopher Hitchens, the atheist, said and get away with it. He said in his book, religion poisons everything. And I would like to think even atheists who don't like what we stand for in our communities would say, well, I don't understand what they think, I don't really like what they think, but simply, these Christians stand out. They are good for community. They just do all the things that we'd love other people to be doing. No, religion doesn't poison everything. And that should be our goal. And that, of course, will commend the gospel and bring glory to God.
We're called to be salt and light, and salt has positive impacts on the community. We restrain evil. We bring out flavour. We seek to make things the way they're meant to be, not leave them the way that they shouldn't be. We seek to run businesses better. We seek to care for patients better. We seek to teach children better. The way that we engage, because we're Christ-like, should change not just our demeanour and attitudes, but the content of what we do. So it seems to me that the overall calling of the Christian is to be a blessing. That is the covenant that God gives to Abraham. You will be a blessing. So we're called to be a blessing. He speaks to Jeremiah and through Jeremiah to the people in exile, and many of us in a sense are in exile. And he says, pray for the prosperity of the city, the shalom, the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've sent you into exile. Pray for its prosperity and seek its prosperity. So we're proactively, as the people of God, as those who are growing more like Him, called to bring wholeness, to bring completeness to it. And I think we see it. I think there are some people, they walk in the room, they change the atmosphere. There are some people who go into meetings, and not because people don't swear, not that that's the litmus test of whether something's godly or not, necessarily, but somehow the atmosphere changes. And we know that people, that works. And I think that is what we're there for, both in those small things, but also in a broader sense of changing societies. So, yeah.
It is exciting. It's also painful, I think, because any relationship that we're in, we can't remain a little island, and it can't rotate around us. And we live in a world that probably always has, but particularly now, says you can only look out for yourself. It's what you want and what you get that matters. And ironically, rather than giving us freedom and life in all its fullness, it actually limits us. And it limits us because it traps us in our sin, and sin becomes this horrible disease that damages us, damages our relationships. And I think the wonderful thing about Christ-likeness is that it's not easy. It is a challenge. Jesus does demand stuff of us. And He's still asking stuff of me that I struggle to hand over always. But I think it's knowing that we are the safest and the most beloved in God's hands. We're never going to be more loved than when we're in the beautiful gaze of God. And the painful stuff that Jesus wants us to hand over to Him, we can hand it over. We can let that stuff go. Mm-hmm. And that's a real challenge, I think. So when I say it is about us becoming more ourselves, I don't mean it in a kind of, it's what I want, but it is that beautiful thing that when God makes people, He says, you're good. Oh, you're great. You're made in my image. You resonate around stuff like faithfulness and justice and compassion, and your heart breaks when you see of injustice and poverty and institutional racism and all that kind of stuff. So I think becoming more like Christ means, as Paul says, that habitually sinning becomes more and more beneath us. Not because we're holier than thou, but that we realise that actually that stuff is what holds us back from experiencing life in all its fullness. I love some of the ancients. So Catherine of Siena, a 14th century nun, who she was one of 23 children, and she went on a bit of she's a fierce lady. She went on a bit of a hunger strike to manipulate her dad, so she didn't have to have an arranged marriage, and she got her way, and she went into a convent, and she dedicated her entire life to living amongst the poor, to being transformed daily by the poverty that she saw. Now that must have made her ask massive questions about God and his character. And as well as that, she spent a lot of her time writing letters and campaigning to all the powers that be about institutional change. But she says this, she says, if we are who we should be, we would change the world.
So we come to kindness, the next of Paul's list of the fruit of the Spirit. I'm sure you've probably heard of the little girl who prayed at night, "Dear God, please make all the bad people good and make all the good people nice." Because kindness and goodness need to go together. There is a kind of goodness that can be so cold and clinical and upright that really it's not very nice. And so Paul puts kindness and goodness together in this way. But we're going to think first of all about kindness. I think the essence of kindness is thoughtfulness for other people above yourself. It means the desire to encourage and help other people, to meet their needs, to give them encouragement, sometimes even when it's inconvenient to yourself, or indeed possibly costly. They sometimes say that kindness costs nothing, but sometimes it can cost a lot. But it's a desire to think, well, what would I want somebody to do for me if I were in that situation, and then to do it as an act or a word or an attitude of kindness. Let's think first of all about kindness as part of the character of God. In the Old Testament there's a wonderful word that the Israelites used to use a lot about God. In Hebrew it's the word chesed. And it's translated in many different ways, sometimes as love or as faithfulness or loyalty or mercy. In older translations as loving kindness, a beautiful old English word, and more recently often simply as kindness. And so often the Israelites would sing and celebrate this. Perhaps the most famous is the ending of the 23rd Psalm, "Surely goodness and mercy," that's the word, kindness, "shall follow me all the days of my life." So when the Apostle Paul was wanting to tell a group of people who had never heard about the one true living God in the town of Lystra, he picked up on this idea of the kindness of God. In Acts chapter 14, he told them, "God has shown you kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." So if that's what God is like, then those who know God and belong to him are called to show that same kind of kindness to others. And so we move on secondly to kindness and the example of Jesus. Because if kindness means caring for others above yourself, then surely Jesus was kindness incarnate. He was kindness on two legs. I've got a friend who says that he wants to write a life of Jesus that he's going to call a theology of interruptions, because he points out that so often many of the things that Jesus says and does, which are recorded in the Gospels, happened because somebody interrupted him when he was going about the place. But Jesus did not resent that or resist that. He responded to those people with kindness. So you think of the woman who came and touched him when Jesus was on his way to heal the daughter of Jairus, or the woman who came and anointed his feet when he was at a supper party, or the woman of Samaria, or blind Bartimaeus, or the parents who brought children to Jesus. Again and again, Jesus shows kindness to people who others regarded as somewhat interloping and interrupting Jesus. And even on the cross, Jesus was thinking of his mother, even above his own pain and suffering. So if that's what Jesus was like in his kindness, I have to ask myself, why do I so often fail to be kind, to show kindness to others? And partly it is because I don't want to be interrupted, because I'm so busy, because I've got things to do and appointments to keep. And so to be delayed or interrupted by stopping to speak or talk or just show kindness in action to people is a bit uncomfortable. Or perhaps sometimes it's because I'm just being self-protective. I certainly find when I'm travelling a lot that you go into what my wife sometimes calls flight mode, where you say, I got to get places, I got to do what I got to do, and don't anybody get in my way or cross me. And in those kind of moments, I need to remind myself, if this were Jesus, what would he do? How would he respond to people around him in need? So kindness then, and the character of Jesus, and whether that is being formed in us. And so that leads us then thirdly to kindness as a habit of life. We do need to remember that what we're talking about here is the fruit of the Spirit. This kind of kindness is not something that just comes naturally, even though of course some people are more naturally kind than others. But Paul is talking about a kind of quality of life which comes from Jesus living within us and bearing that fruit of kindness within us. So kindness is a fruit that has to be cultivated until it becomes a habit and part of our character, in which it becomes almost more natural to do what is kind than not to, or at least where it becomes very uncomfortable to do what is unkind, or to fail to do what could be a kind word or action to others. And so I wonder if, as we go out into each day, to our travel, to our work, in our homes, wherever it may be that we are, should we just stop and pray and ask God, God, help me to find those opportunities in this day's life and work where I can show kindness to others? Is there someone that I can thank, whether in a shop or cleaning the streets? Is there someone I can appreciate and make their life just a little bit more bearable? Where can I give a smile or a word of appreciation and commendation and praise? How can I help someone in need or in poverty, where I can actually give something of myself to their needs? How can I show kindness in action? That's something of the fruit of the Spirit. The final thought here is that such Christ-like kindness is a very strong witness because it is deeply attractive. Dame Anita Roddick, who founded the Body Shop, said this. She said, "The end result of kindness is that it draws people to you." Well, for us, thinking about kindness as the fruit of the Spirit, perhaps we might want to say that the end result of kindness is that it draws people to Jesus.